we are having a conversation in English, right now, and using specific, word instances. You can go back and said, oh, I said this at this point, and Tony said this at that point. So those are particular sentences and that sort of thing. But if they don't convey a meaning, and if there's no way that you can sustain even a meaning on nominalism, you got meaning one, meaning two, meaning three.
Right.
If you can't even sustain that, then what good is it to refer to, to try to put all the emphasis or all the work now upon words we use?
Words. Okay, everyone. Welcome again to the Kirkwood Center podcast for Theology and Ethics. My name is Anthony Costello, and today I'm joined again by a friend and colleague, not so much a colleague, but a former professor, I would say. At least had Scott for a few classes. Scott in philosophy of mind at the time when I was at Talbot for my master's degree in theology. So Scott Smith, professor at Biola University, Talbot School of Theology and Philosophy and Apologetics, joining us again. Scott, how are you doing this morning? It's good to see you.
Oh, I'm doing okay, I think.
Yeah.
How about you?
Marching along. That'll be an inside joke.
Yeah.
For us, but yeah,
I'm hobbling along.
hobbling along. Yeah, I'm doing good. So Scott, I wanted to have you on one more time. And again, the book that we're going through is your latest book. I believe this is your most recent one, correct?
Yes.
Exposing the Roots of Constructivism, and it's got a longer subtitle, Nominalism and the Ontology of Knowledge. And we did a recording a few weeks back where I think we did a pretty good job of just giving an overview of nominalism and some of the positions that it leads to, and the dangers of nominalism, especially with regards to sort of the livability of the view. Can the view really be lived out in the day-to-day? And we did a pretty good job of, I think, going through the major points of the book, but we wanted to hone in a little bit more. So we'll reference people to that first video. And here we're going to go into a little bit more specifics on especially two views of nominalism. And we're going to try and get a little bit more in depth on the arguments that you present against those nominalist options. Okay, so we'll do that first. Then we're going to get into some of the work of Dr. William Lane Craig, who everybody on this podcast will be familiar with, I think, and a view of sort of anti-realism that he has come to promote. I don't want to say promote, but it's his view. He's got an anti-realist view about universals that you've raised concerns about. So we'll want to take a look at that. And then we'll end today's episode talking about some realist options with regards to universals, and the kind of view that you think would be best suited for, especially for Christians who are making, religious claims, truth claims, about knowing things about God and the world, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
So let's start off, and I'm going to go back to some previous notes that I had from your book. I tried to take as many notes as I could. Let's go back to, this is chapter 1 of the book, where you take on trope nominalism. Okay, so maybe just, again, give us a sort of a view, understanding of what tropes are for the trope nominalist, and then why you think that ultimately, though, this idea of invoking tropes sort of fails as a good explanatory, maybe, model.
Okay. Well, let me first give credit where credit's due. J.P. Moreland, did quite a bit of work on this and developed this specific argument against tropes in his book called Universals. And he did that in particular with his focus on Keith Campbell, a nominalist, in his earlier and later views. And so basically, I really agree with JP, on this. And then I'm going to take the view and go a step beyond what I've seen JP do in print, although I'm sure he would see the implications too, and apply it to austere nominalism, the other view, as well. But the trope view basically says, hey, there are real qualities. There is real gray, color, or brown, or there are real shapes. There are real moral properties, you could say, justice and loving kindness and those sort of things. But these are all particular things. So we may talk about, or how about seeing both our faces on the screen here, you think about being human. There's one human and there's another human, on the screen. Now, it sounds like they've got this thing called humanness, in common. Well, but there are particulars, on this view. So, humanness, you might say, is a real quality on this view, but it is particular. Mm-hmm. So you end up having humanness or human one and human two, or human three, and etc. But since they are particular, it looks like if we kind of list them out, human one, human two, human three, it sounds like, hey, they've all got this thing called humanness in common. Mm-hmm. But no, not so on a trope nominalist view. Yeah, those qualities are real. There's a human, there's another human, etc. But they don't literally have humanness in common. There's no literal identical quality they all share, because that's what realists say. Those who believe that there are these things called universals, something that's identical that we both, have in common, and can share. So they say that those sort of, these properties are real and yet particular. And, the way I just kind of described them, human one, human two, human three, being particular, there's another idea that needs to be brought out and made specific here. That is on nominalism of any view, tropes in particular here, is that things are metaphysically simple. That means that they are just one thing in reality. That's all they are.
Okay. Well, they're not composites of multiple things. They're one single thing. I mean, in that sense, it's simple. Or
well, let me try to focus just on let's just say I still have a little brown, in my hair, and you got it, in your beard there. And let's say, hey, it looks like we've got this, brown, something we have in common.
Yeah.
Well, on this kind of view, we don't literally share brownness in common. And there's just this particular thing, a particular quality, brown one, brown two, let's say.
That are located in, like, they're spatially located in those different spots in space.
Yes, that's right. Okay. Yes. Okay. But it sounds like, there are, the way we talk about them, saying brown one, brown two, brown three, whatever, the brown in the hutch behind me, all those sort of things. It sounds like, there's something literally, they have in common. And it's something, that there's something that individuates that brown versus this brown or your brown. But the thing is, the trope view says, no, these things are just one thing. So we may talk about them, and I deliberately say that we talk about them, and this will come out more clearly a little bit later, why I stress that here. We speak about them as though there is this, one quality here, another quality there, another quality here, as though there's um, a quality and something that individuates it.
Okay.
There's
Yeah.
this one, that one, etc. But that can't be, because on the view it says no, they're just one thing. So which is it? And this is where JP goes and says we may talk about them as though there's brown 1 and 2 and 3, but really there's just one thing. There's brown and some sort of numerator or individuator, that
Okay. So there's
distinguishes
the
them.
brown, and then we're using that. There's the one, two. There's that
Right.
one, that one, that one,
Right.
that one, that one,
Yeah, and
and so
this
on and
one
so
and
forth.
that sort of thing.
Okay.
So it sounds like we are treating them as though they are a union of two things, but they can't be on the theory.
Okay. Right. Okay. The quality
Uh-huh.
and the individuating thing.
Yeah. The
Okay.
word or the number, whatever, the numerator.
Right.
So if that's really the case, one or the other of those can be eliminated without any loss in reality, because the view says there's really only one thing here. So let's say we got rid of the numerator, one or two or
The
three or whatever.
numerical individual. Okay. Yeah.
But then we just got this thing called brown. Well, now it sounds like there's something they all these examples all have in common. And they literally cannot, because the view says they're all particular. Because and this is what, something that's the same and in common in all these is what realists say. Those who believe that there's universals, one thing like brown,
Mhm.
and yet many different instances, of it.
Of it. Right.
So you can't have that. And it's treating brown as though it's this abstract object, this abstract entity. When on the view here, it's got to be particular. So if you eliminate the numerator, you got this problem. You end up with realism, it seems
Okay.
like,
So if
after
you
all.
eliminate the individuator, I think is what I
That,
call it, the
that
thing
yeah,
that would
that
make it numerically distinct,
particular. Yeah.
particular. Then you it looks like you basically have a view of a realist view of universals. You just kind of it
Right.
just kind of like falls into that then.
And that's inimical to the view. It destroys the
Right.
view. It can't be that.
Okay.
On the other hand, well, let's try the other way and
Yeah.
say, well, the quality brown, let's eliminate it, because there's no real loss if we did that. But then we just have these individuators like this, that, or the other, or one, two, three. And it's like, what are they individuating?
What are they though? You got yeah, okay. All right, I
And
see.
so it's incoherent.
Mhm. Mhm.
So either way, and this is what Moreland does, in that book, Universals. You end up either way, it seems like you cannot sustain trope nominalism. You can't sustain tropes.
Mhm.
It because one way it collapses into realism, the other way it collapses into incoherence.
Right. Right. You just have a
This,
bunch of things individuating, but you cannot say what they're individuating
yeah,
at all.
it, yeah, it's nonsensical.
Right.
Oh, one, two, three, what? you know, one baseball player, two baseball players, three baseball players, but one, two, three, what?
Right. Yeah. Okay.
It's got to be something that it applies to.
Okay.
And
Right.
if you go that route and eliminate the quality, then you lose it. You can. This is why I like to say, and I think JP does too, you cannot sustain on this view, you cannot sustain qualities, for example, or properties in existence.
Right.
The-
Which are the
They,
things of our experience. I mean, you just the qualities are the things of our real world experience,
yeah,
right? From
yeah,
colors to shapes to, everything.
humans.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So if you apply this like to humans, it leads to big trouble, because now it's like, oh, yeah. So you had a
Yeah.
question earlier. You say, well, you kind of led to this. I forget exactly how you said it, but like a human in this case, I've got a brown trope, but I got a
Mhm.
gray trope, and I've got different shape tropes and weight and all these sort of things. Well, on this kind of view, I'm just a bundle of these tropes, these particular properties. They're real, supposedly, but I'm
Yeah.
just a bundle of these things. Um, that's all I am. But if you can't sustain the tropes in existence, like I just tried to argue,
Mm.
then we don't exist, either.
Okay. That.
And so,
Okay. Yeah.
uh, and that to me is where this really goes, because it cannot sustain things in reality.
Because, and it struck me because, and it's probably only because we're saying the words 1, 2, 3, because the tropes are not numbers
No,
either. Because, right?
no, they're not.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean, we're just using numerical language there to help us sort of conceptually, but because I just the individuator, the thing doing the individuating is we can't say anything about it. I don't think, right?
yeah, it can't be a real thing if you're going to keep Brown as real, because again, these you can't have two things, that are real, in this view. It's got to be one thing.
Right,
Uh, this instance of gray,
right,
or whatever.
right.
Um, this is where I think nominalism really goes.
Yeah, and
Bec-
the reason I just mentioned that is because I there is I mean, I was thinking of Pythagoras for a moment there, and I think I got confused because there is in my reading of Copleston, he seems to say that the Pythagoreans literally thought that objects were numbers.
huh.
And I know that I've heard that there are some physicists currently who almost believe the same, that everything is reducible down to actual numbers, but that would not be what we're talking about here, because the tropes are not themselves numbers, right? They're just sort of just sort of postulating them uh, in a
To
way
help make sense,
to
yeah,
help
of
make
these
sense,
things being, yeah, particular.
particular and not, yeah. Okay.
We
All
could go
right.
back to the other language we were using of this, that one,
That
or
one, this one, this other one.
yeah.
Yeah. Right. Right.
But maybe I should say something there, Tony, too,
Okay.
that I haven't done a whole lot of work on this, but it seems like it would carry over. Um, what if we applied trope nominalism to numbers themselves?
Yeah. Okay.
Because then we have a distinction between numbers and numerals, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Because we can have the number one, in my view, itself. It's a realist kind of view. No matter where I look around here, I can say, oh, there's one eye. Oh, one eye. There's one TV over there, and all these sorts of things. But we could write out, for example, on a piece of paper or on the screen, we could type the number one and repeat it, copy and paste it, however many times we wanted to. I've got a bunch of numerals there that are
Mm-hmm.
sense perceptible, but they all represent, I'd say, the number one. Um, so then, in my view, I'm switching away from the trope view a bit here. The number one itself is one thing, but it can have many instances.
Instances. Right. Right.
Well, so I think you could apply the nominalist view back to numbers. And I think Bill, Craig, getting ahead a little bit here,
Mhm.
has to apply it that way too. That these things are not real. Uh, you know, uh, they end up being ways of talking, but we'll get to that.
Modes of discussion. Yeah. Right.
Yeah,
Linguistic constructs.
yeah.
Okay. So now, okay. So that's the problem that we're pointing out, that JP and then you have pointed out with the trope nominalism, it can't be this unity of two things, the quality and the individuator, if it's a simple, which is claimed. So if
Right.
you get rid of the one, though, if you get rid of the individuator, then you have these qualities that are sort of hanging there, but they're real. um, but that is sort of collapses into basically the view that universals are real, right?
Right.
And
Right.
then if you try and say, well, okay, they're let's just say they're only individuators, then you never get any qualities. All the qualities of our experience sort of all of a sudden disappear into thin air on the theory.
I
Right.
think if you and JP's point, and I'm following him with it, is that if you push the view for consistency,
Yeah.
that's what you end up with.
Okay. If you put, yeah,
Yes.
right. Okay. All right. That's good. So okay, good. We'll leave it there. I mean, it gets a little more technical in the book, and
Yeah.
I would say, like, let's get people into the conversation. If they want to go deeper,
Sure.
you can grab the book or go to your website and check out some of the articles that we'll link to. But because we do want to move into then, well, let's do this, because let's go from trope nominalism, and then chapter 2 talks about a different kind of nominalist argument called austere nominalism. So moving away from trope nominalism in particular, pun intended, let's talk about this alternative of austere nominalism, that I think maybe predates a little bit the trope nominalism as well. I'm not sure, but why don't you go ahead and fill us in on that?
Austere nominalism differs from the trope cousin, so to speak, in that properties are not real. Qualities on it are not real. So brown as a quality is not real on this kind of view. The things that are real are concrete or particular objects, like
Okay.
me, as an object, or you, or that hutch behind me, or whatever, a dog, um,
Yeah.
a ball. These are
Scott, I
Mac.
mean, maybe, I'm sorry, maybe I should, this was a thought. So again, just for my own clarity here in my mind,
Sure.
so the trope nominalist, again, wants something real
Yeah.
that is sense perceptible. I think we should, the tropes are, yeah, they're sense perceptible, right?
Okay.
Yeah. Is
Yeah.
that what the trope? Okay. Now, the austere nominalist is just going to eliminate the sense that these qualities are real at all, right?
And what we have are real instead of these macro kind of objects,
Okay. All right. So,
concrete objects, objects located in space and time, so
yeah.
they should be sense perceptible.
Okay.
Um, I think for most, the nominalists, would hold that. Um, so for them, um, what's real here is like, hey, I'm a particular human being. Um, and it's not that these qualities per se are real. So what we have there, instead of trying to pick out the individual things like, oh, brown and gray and shape and all these things, instead you might spell it out. You might describe me as a guy wearing blue shirt, mustached, receding, graying hair, human. And all these things would be hyphenated, if we wrote this out,
Okay.
here. It's not like there's this guy who has all these individual qualities. No, we might represent that in language as far as saying, here is this blue shirted, mustached, receding hairlined, I'm just making up how to talk about this,
Yeah.
brown haired human. And all these are hyphenated, meaning this is just one macro object, one concrete particular thing, we're talking about. And these are all not individual qualities about them. These are more or less, I guess, just ways of talking about this concrete object that we call Scott Smith. That's it. Um,
Okay.
So it's not that I've got these real qualities, and all. It's
Mhm.
just that um, that is just ways of, yeah, it's just me. This one big, one concrete object that can be described by all these different sorts of words.
Okay, so it's a yeah, we use language in this way to describe the things of
Yeah.
our experience, but we
Okay.
it's sort of like in the back of our minds we sort of know that we're not really describing anything that's how should I
Yeah,
put it? Without just
originally
using
real.
real again. Yeah, without just using real again.
Okay.
Um, and what? But then, if 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 you have multiple people describing the same thing in the same way or close enough, then what does the austere nominalist say about the fact that you have multiple people, multiple minds, I guess, describing the same object in a, if not identical, very similar way? How would they respond to that then? Why do the linguistic descriptions come out similarly? If that makes sense, is that I don't know.
Actually, I think it's a very good question. Um, it reminds me of some of the work I did on postmoderns, who basically, go the same kind of route. And it comes down to, I think, that there are certain approved, maybe, ways of talking. Excuse me. Um, Depending on the community or language game, we might say,
Right.
even if we
That
follow
too.
Wittgenstein's kind
Yeah.
of route,
Yeah.
or there's just certain ways of talking according to which, and I'll bring him in here. Bill Craig will talk about linguistic frameworks. There's certain ways of speaking from these frameworks that are appropriate given its grammatical rules, you might say,
Mhm.
or according to its formative story, perhaps. So as Christians, there's certain, or as evangelical Christians, there are certain rules that govern the way we talk, um, and that um, it's okay to make those kinds of utterances, and say, yeah, this guy, who fits these descriptions. But each of those sentences used to do that are all particular as well.
Mhm.
They are, I guess, a concrete particular too, made up of many words.
Mhm.
But each of those words is not real per se, I guess, is to take it consistently here. It's just a concrete, the sentence itself is just a concrete object.
Okay.
And we, based upon the rules of our community, the way we're supposed to talk, or according to our grammar, as
Mhm.
some put it. I'm not sure Bill would want to put it that way, by the way, but I think some, would. This is how we, talk, accordingly here. Um, it may seem as though, we have the same meaning, in each of those sentences, but that literally cannot be the case because each of these are particulars. And if there was
Okay,
a
because
meaning,
right, because there wouldn't. Okay, I see where we're getting at because there couldn't be a shared propositional content.
yes,
You gave your description one of
yes,
yourself. I
right,
give description two of Scott Smith, regardless of the fact that the words we used were similar.
yes,
On the view, there cannot be any shared universal between the two similarly appearing strings of words, something like
right.
that.
I'm,
Okay.
if I could just play off that for a
Yeah.
second, this, at least while it's fresh in my mind, um, one of the topics that Bill has
Yeah.
raised, in particular, is a book, article called "Propositional Truth: Who Needs It?" And I've replied to that, I forget the exact title, but it's a very similar one, and it appears in the same journal, Philosophia Christi, which goes after this. Both of these are about this issue, meanings, um, and he's focusing on sentences and saying propositions would be these things called universals. They one thing but many instances, that are expressed by these different sentences. Um, you don't need those things. He thinks to be able to refer accordingly. That's if I as far as I remember with that.
Mhm.
And I'm trying to argue that sentences cannot capture all this sort of stuff, because they are these particulars. And well, uh, the same problem, if I can jump ahead here.
Yeah.
um, the same problem, I think, applies to austere nominalism as applied to trope and nominalism.
Okay. Yeah.
JP didn't address this specifically or explicitly, although I'm sure it must have crossed his mind.
Mhm.
But
Can't write
this is where
everything down
oh,
that goes through JP's mind.
oh,
It
I
would,
don't think I thought of this
it would take, you'd have to live to be
uniquely.
250 years old. Yeah.
I just try to extend the idea that he surfaces against tropes and say,
Mhm.
let's apply this now to the austere view,
Okay.
because it's the same thing. Now I'm concrete object one, you're concrete object two, or human one and human two. There's sentence one, there's sentence two. Um, what is it about these things? It's the same issue. We've got a sentence and an individuator. We've got a human and an individuator, but they can't both be real. Only one of them can be real. So we can eliminate one or the other without any real loss.
Mhm.
And we end up, again, without a view that can sustain in reality even concrete objects like ourselves or sentences or
Or
anything like that.
sentences. Right. Right. The sentences themselves run into the same problem. Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I know that they keep coming back to talking about language, but this is why I felt so it was so important to write that article about addressing propositions and responding to his view on that, because um, even language is as I've studied under JP, and you have too, and many in the audience probably know, JP is taught us about words, for example. Uh, they also are types and tokens.
Mhm.
A word type, um, use the word human, let's say, and then we kind of use it, many different instances. So it sounds like it's a universal, the
Right.
type thing. But then you have the tokens, the individual,
Instance.
uses or
Right.
individual instances of those words, human one, human two, all those sort of things. So just by switching over and putting the focus on language doesn't get rid of the problem. It just pushes the problem back onto words.
You know,
And,
yeah. Okay. Keep going. I'm sorry. Finish your thought. It's things are bouncing around here. So yeah.
yeah, and that reminds me that the same applies to meanings. Um, we are having a conversation in English, right now, and using specific, word instances. You can go back and said, oh, I said this at this point, and Tony said this at that point. So those are particular sentences and that sort of thing. But if you cannot, if they don't convey a meaning, and if there's no way that that you can sustain even a meaning on nominalism, you got meaning one, meaning two, meaning three.
Right. Right.
If you can't even sustain that, then what good is it to refer to, to try to put all the emphasis or all the work now upon words we use?
Words. Right.
It's the same problem. It just repeats at that level.
Was it Shakespeare who wrote words, 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 or something like, in like just in this sort of rebellion against
Well, you,
words. But
you just reminded me, though.
yeah,
Something else he said, a rose by any other name would
yeah.
smell as sweet. There's
Well,
something real about a rose.
Right.
versus the
Well,
names we give it.
and I don't know if I quoted it in I think in the last video you bring up a quote by is it a Richard Weaver?
Yeah.
Well, he starts off with the scene from Macbeth.
Oh,
And, and we
yeah.
did talk about how if everything comes down to words,
Yeah.
and we're the producers of words, right? I mean, because you talk about language games and language structures and I don't know, authoritative rules within language communities, but there is this idea that, well, what produces language, what produces the rules of language, who are the gatekeepers of language.
Yeah.
And now you start to move, I think, in the direction of voluntarism, right? Which I think is the fear. And maybe that's even, I think you made a point about Occam last time
Yeah.
that, but we're now like, what are the things that sort of regulate our experiences? Is it really just the words that we produce within these language communities, and then that can get changed either over time, and then all of a sudden we're talking about totally different things, or people can like the will can kind of control the language being sort of downstream from the will. And
Oh,
there, I mean, I think you have like, in this we talked about the moral problems. I think you have real serious issues there if we want to say everything we're describing is just words. We're the producers of words, and we sort of create words almost like poets. We create the words, we create the rules for the words. Everything's just created by you know our will. And that sort of goes back to like that quote from Macbeth that Weaver was playing off of, that kind of puts us in the position of being the creators of reality, right? Or what we're calling
yes.
real.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think like it may have come up in the past video, but yeah, that just hits me. I think that's very much tied to what we see in Genesis 3:5. I think that is our default condition after the fall.
Yeah.
We want to be like God, defining good and evil, even the rest of reality.
And one other thought before we get a little bit more into Dr. Craig's view
Uh-huh.
specifically, although we've touched
Yeah.
on it already. But this is another thing that I've thought about from just regards to one of our. If you take the theological doctrine of Christ's incarnation, right? I mean, if you don't have something, a human essence or nature that
Mhm.
each individual person shares in, then it seems to me, I may be wrong, I haven't thought this fully out, but it seems to me that it would not suffice for Christ to incarnate just one time,
Ooh.
right? Because Christ can come once and the job on the cross can be finished once and for all, because we all share in something, a human nature that he redeems, right? But if there's no human nature in which we share, and it's just human one, human two, human three, all the way up to however many 80 billion there have been, it seems to me that if you wanted to be theologically consistent with your doctrine of the incarnation, Christ would need to incarnate like 80 billion plus times, one incarnation per individuated concrete particular person, right? That
Yeah.
seems to me like, I mean, a real
Wow.
problem. I don't know, but I don't know if you have anything but it's just something that came to me.
Real problem biblically.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we wouldn't want to say God that Christ's incarnation was insufficient because he only did it once.
Exactly.
And in that one instance of incarnation and sacrifice on the cross, maybe you get one particular concrete individual saved, the thief on the cross, let's say, but that this would have to happen for every single individual concrete particular that we call, in virtue of our language, a human.
Yeah, and I'm forgetting all the details off the top of my head because this is not something that's been all before me, all the time here. But yeah, I wrote on this in Theologica, an essay about the Incarnation. Um, could he have really taken on a identical human nature? And no, because there is no such thing.
Because there isn't one. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, and none of us have that. So again, I'm afraid it all comes back to words, ways of talking. But forgive me for being, your audience, forgive me for sound like I'm being very trite here. But I think the expression says it well. Talk is cheap.
Yeah. Yeah.
If it's not backed up with
That's it.
reality,
Right.
talk is cheap. We can talk all we want about Christ dying for all our sins, at and how he could atone for mine and yours and each of us. But if there's not this thing we share in common, I think you've got a real good point there.
Yeah. Yeah. If
Um,
there's not,
a
you need
very
an ontological
serious
basis
point.
for that. Right. Right. Well, okay, let's tackle a little bit more some of Dr. And this obviously, Dr. Craig has been a great uh influence and everything for us, and I've had him in class a couple times. And so, but this is a critique of his anti-realism, and I was in that. I remember sitting in on that class before the book came out, God and Abstract Objects. And so we should say in advance. I think we all know that his concern is that there not be all of these uncreated things
Right.
existing eternally alongside the uncreated creator and
Right.
triune God. And that's a legitimate concern
It's a
that
good one.
drove his project, along with an exegetical point of view that it cannot be that there are any other uncreated things,
Okay.
agenitas, things
Okay.
other than God. So the desire to eliminate maybe the realm of Platonic forms is understandable,
Uh-huh.
um,
Yeah.
but in embracing the anti-realism about abstract objects, this leads to some problems. So I don't know if you want to just pick one particular thing, maybe like his Kalam cosmological argument that you bring up at the book, or um, the moral argument, or something to maybe illustrate some of the problems with Dr. Craig's embrace of anti-realism.
Okay. Um, I'll just mention um, briefly, about moral argument. I did write an article again, Phil Christie. It's one of my earlier ones, against his view. Uh, I the way he explains or way he lists his premises and conclusion. If I think it, for his moral argument, if God doesn't exist, uh, objective moral truths, don't exist. But then I think it is objective moral truths do exist, and therefore God exists. Uh, this is an argument I think that based on those premises and conclusion and the way I interpret them as a realist. And I think many, going through the apologetics program that I teach, can readily embrace. But I think that if you understand those premises on an anti-realist basis, that's where I think problems, start coming. Because in his article about it, well, not article, I think it's a chapter in his Reasonable Faith book, and then I think he's also written about it at Reasonable Faith website. But when you get into it, he's not talking about somehow that these are truths that somehow match up, you know, uh, objectively. These claims somehow match up objectively with real states of affairs. Instead, these are, like we've just talked about, these are um, claims that are true given a linguistic framework,
Mm.
a Christian theological one. for example. And he wants to argue then, and rightfully so, that the Christian, these really do defend the reality of the Christian God. And I'm right there with him, on
Mhm.
that. I just don't think you can sustain that on the austere nominalist, kind of view. Because again, what are these kinds of claims? Well, they are stated as sentences. That's what they are. They're not propositions. They're not abstract entities that can be before many minds at the same time. These are concrete, particular claims.
Mhm.
And the same problem that we just looked at applies to those very claims. So, uh, and I guess I'm kind of branching away, and maybe expanding a bit,
Yeah.
in light of some work I've done on some of the postmoderns. So I think, end up holding at the end of the day, they're also austere nominalists. I
Yeah.
think it's about language and how we use it, our given frameworks, communities, whatever you want to call it. It's just a way we happen to talk. So what?
Yeah.
Because different groups talk differently. Why should one group embrace this way of talking over another if it doesn't better explain the way reality is, and if it can't sustain reality, which I don't think those sort of claims can on the austere nominalist kind of view that he's endorsing,
Yeah.
then what are we what are we really getting at here?
Because there's no real like virtue like justice or love or th- I mean that other that persons might instance or that their character might instance. Again, it's boils down to us using sentences in such a way. I mean, I suppose to say to describe something about God, I suppose at the end of the day, right, is what he would say. But um, it.
Yeah.
I mean, so we would say like any. I mean, what? Because he's going to obviously say there are true. Okay, would he not say there are true propositions? Would he say there are true sentences?
Yes. Because I don't think he could admit into his ontology, his views of what are real, propositions,
Yeah,
because those are abstract objects.
right. So
It's
there are
all about
true
sentences.
sentences, and sentences are true in virtue of what makes them true on that view.
I think it boils down to a linguistic framework, as he would say, following Carnap's views.
Okay.
It's given a particular way of talking. And I think I might be trivializing this, perhaps a little danger there, but I think it follows. This fits, to use some others, terms, this fits the Christian story.
Well, okay, and we've seen that in other philosophers and theologians. We
Right,
talked about Alistair McIntyre last time, and that sounds
right.
very much like
Yes,
something he
yes.
would say as well.
I think
I'm
so.
trying to think of some of the Anglican theologians who have spoken in terms like that. Maybe Milbank, some of those guys who talk about narrative theology, and
Okay.
they talk in terms of coherent stories,
Yes.
right? But I know we talked about McIntyre last time, and what was it? The the language community one is in, and then one can sort of put oneself into a second language community and learn their language, and then kind of try and see which one has the better rational resources. But then we were struggling to understand maybe what he meant by better and rational resources.
And
Uh,
how is it that there is really a person who remains the same, who could see things from one community's way of talking and then somehow migrate over and still be the same person who could learn the way of speaking from a different linguistic community and see that it's rationally superior.
right.
He's banking on a phenomena. This is McIntyre, not Craig,
Okay.
for the audience here. But McIntyre is banking on our abilities to learn other languages, and immerse ourselves, that's fine. But how on earth, on a nominalist kind of view, is there really a person who is real,
Yeah.
who can undergo this kind of process? And
Does Dr. Craig now would Dr. Craig call himself a nominalist, or is he or is I mean, because I know he outlined a couple different kinds of anti-realism. I haven't read the book, but I read the long sort of class notes for it. But
okay,
um, and I know I don't know if he just didn't like the term nominalism because it lacked clarity, and he wanted to be more clear about exactly what he was doing or rejecting. But is there a significant difference there between anti-realism and nominalism in your view?
well, I think what he's getting at is he often prefers, yes, anti-realist, but he's juxtaposing himself versus a Platonist, kind of view. So he might call himself more an anti-Platonist
Yeah, right.
because he thinks it's going to undermine God's unique aseity,
God's aseity.
uh,
Yeah.
like you said in your intro to this part. Um, so he thinks that there's plenty of possibilities that we can look into, and should explore, and he's tried to defend nominalist approaches, for that, especially the austere one. I haven't seen him really try to do the trope. Um,
Okay.
so the austere nominalist one is the one he's really put forward. But as he's put in writing, I think failing that, conceptualism is a backup, one for it.
Divine conception, which
Right.
has a long history in the church, at least back to Augustine. If not, I think I might have found some passages in Irenaeus or somebody else that move in that direction.
Yeah,
And for the sake of the audience, that would be universals, or are we, Scott, for sake of clarifying, are we using universals and abstract objects as equivalent things?
I am.
Okay.
I am doing that.
Okay.
Yes.
So divine conceptualism would be the backup, and that wouldn't be that universals or abstract objects are thoughts in God's mind prior to creation that are sort of these they're the archetypes. To use Plato's, I think is more accurate train, the archetypes, or the because I think it's iconos. And then upon creation, these archetypes are instantiated in a real spatial temporal world, right? Something like that.
I I don't, but
No.
I think if we hold that though, because then it means something like, um, I have concepts somehow present in my being. You know, I don't have humanness. I have the concept of humanness.
Right.
You know, and that's a problem, I think, because human thoughts, let's say things like individual things like thoughts, are of or about things. Beliefs, most mental states have that quality of intentionality, being of or about
Mhm.
things. Concepts are like that too. They're kind of mental state. They involve thoughts, maybe with certain logical connectors, perhaps between them, but they're still of or about. So a concept about Craig's Kalam, argument, or about the
Mm.
Kalam, let's say, or about what it is to be a human. So those are concepts. Those are properties of minds, and I think I think we can maybe speak in terms of analogously, but it's going to break down here though. But analogously, it's like, okay, uh, I've created that book. I had to have a lot of concepts organized, express them in writing, revise them, all that good
Mm.
stuff, many times. So those, I had to think about it conceive of it, all the revision process to create the book, in which those things are expressed. Did God have to go through that kind of process in order to create, like human beings?
Yeah, right.
Well, I don't think he had to go, well, let me think about how to do all that. No,
Yeah.
he just did it, and it's perfect, wisdom and all. But it seems like there could be a concept in God's mind, and then he creates an object that falls under or matches up with, fulfills, that concept.
Mm-hmm.
So we are humans in that, we fall under the concept, if you will, of what it is to be human. But human nature, we can have a concept of human nature, he's sure, that thoughts about what it is to be human. But human nature itself is different.
Okay.
I don't think that's a concept.
Okay.
And
So that would have to be created then, right?
Yeah. And
That would
I
have to
think
be
that,
created.
so conceptualism, I don't think I think that's where it falls short.
Okay.
As
And you
far
do
as
have a paragraph on conceptualism at the beginning of the last chapter, chapter 8. I think where you make that point, and then so then you move into so leaving austere nominalism and Dr. Craig's embrace of austere nominalism. We're moving now into what your view is and JP's view, and maybe some alternative option for for everybody, not just for Christians. It doesn't matter if you're a Christian or not, because this wouldn't be a language game, is what we're saying, right? Wouldn't matter what community you're in. Which is the realist view of universals. So universals are real. Abstract objects are real. But let's say they're not concepts, so they're not just concepts in a mind. They are on this view, they would be, well, let's do this. You lay out two possibilities in the chapter. One is called an in-ray view of universals, that was held by Armstrong. I think that's David Armstrong, right?
yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then your view and JP's and probably several others of anti-REM. Okay, so maybe explain those two terms, and then let's just go through them a little bit.
Well, David Armstrong was a materialist. So he's kind of this odd fit, in here as far as amongst materialists. Most of them are going to be nominalists, you would say. But nonetheless, he tried to argue that there are these universal, properties, that they exist, but it's on a materialist kind of view of what's real. On that kind of view of what's real, a materialist one, you can't have things existing in themselves, quality of red, let's say, somehow apart from its instances. They've got to be instants. They're all in space and time.
Spatial temporally located, right?
Yeah, because they're material things.
Yeah.
So they've got to be in their objects.
Okay.
And now some people have tried to say Aristotle, would also be this in-ray, kind of.
It's probably that's what I thought of initially. It sounds like Aristotle, but
and E.J. Lowe, someone I've written about a little bit, some of that theologic essay. He follows Aristotle's view, but but simply in the sense, and I think this helps clarify it, that for Aristotle and Lowe, in order for a universal to exist, it has to have at least one instance. So in re in that sense. So for there to be humanness, let's say, the essence of being a human, there has to be at least one human on this kind of view. But I think, I forget who it was who said this in one of my classes that I took a long time ago. But Aristotle believed in the forms. He
Yeah.
was Plato's disciple.
Yeah.
and and so he was he believed in the reality, these universals, that exist apart from their instances, like Plato did. But unlike Plato, he, like Lowe, thought that you have to have at least one instance in order for a universal to be real. Well, okay, fine. That's quite different than Armstrong's kind of view. The Platonic kind of view that I'm trying to go after or go defend, and
Mhm.
JP does, too, and I think Dallas Willard would have too, is the anti-rem thing. These things, these universals, these universal qualities like humanness, for example, exist in themselves. They themselves are not spatially or temporally located. They're not instanced, in other words, in
Okay.
space and time. The universal itself, but their instances are. So here I am, on this date, here in my house and where I live. Um, my humanness is located,
Mhm.
spatially, temporally located here, with me. Um, but the universal humanness itself is an abstract entity, on this kind of view, and because of that, it it does not it doesn't on Plato's view it doesn't have to be instanced
Mhm.
in order for it to be real or to exist. Uh, and that way, these things, God could sustain them in existence timelessly. This is the modified kind of Platonist view you mentioned we, you know,
Yeah.
uh, talk about. God could sustain these things timelessly, and in that sense, they are not created by being sustained in existence, but outside of space and time. They are still dependent upon God for their existence. They're not self-existent. They're not
So
ase,
they could
like
be
God.
they could be okay, not well, eternal in the sense of timeless, but
Yes,
derivative and contingent upon God.
right.
Yeah.
That's the kind of view I've seen JP
They're
initially
not they're
propose.
not necessary
Right.
either. Yeah.
Given the kind of creation, God has made, that there would be humans. Yeah, there's got to be, human essences. For example, humanness. But were these things um, necessary, co-eternal, independent of God? No,
No, right.
they're not. They don't exist, I'll say. And that's Bill's big concern. That boy, if these abstract objects really exist, then they would rival God, as the only say self-existent entity or being. And that's a good concern he's got, a very good concern. If
Yeah.
he's right about that, then Platonism is a deal breaker.
Right. Right.
But but I think that the best explanation that if these things really are these universals exist in themselves, as if they exist as abstract objects, not in space and time,
Yeah. Right.
then that God sustains them in existence timelessly. Um,
Prior to the creation of the
Spatio-temporal
universe.
universe.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Then they don't rival God's unique self-existence.
Right.
They are dependent upon Him.
Is that what Van Ingwagen argues, or does he have a Platonic realm that really is separate and independent
I
from?
don't know,
Okay.
his particular view.
All right. We'll
I
leave that
I know I
aside.
don't.
Okay. Just
Yeah,
because I know he is a Platonist in some regard.
yeah.
But okay. So yeah. So you would have God in the and universals
Hmm?
existing timelessly, but where obviously the universals are contingent, unnecessary, um, created. Are they
Created in the sense of not coming into being at a point in time. It's not
right?
about that.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
but created in the sense of dependent for their existence upon
Dependent for
God.
their existence. Contingent. These are contingent, uh, real essences, universals, objects. Yeah.
Yeah, contingent in the sense of how God decided, the universe,
Right.
the universe he decided, to create
Yeah.
and can bring into existence.
Dependent on his will and power. Is the way you
Yes.
put it in
And
theological
wisdom
language.
and all.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Right. Okay. And then given this model, you have a real uh sort of answer to all of the above problems that we just listed with the nominalist views. You have the shared common commonalities between everything from apples to ants to human beings,
And thoughts
and
and
thoughts
meanings.
that are about real things, and
And and
sentences that have actual content about real things. Yeah.
and this is where I think, if we stop and think about things like even what we're doing right now, or for those who will watch this and just try to follow along and think about it, um, how is it that what does that depend upon? I think we can't just have these exactly similar, meanings, supposedly, because what does that really involve? I think it boils down to, as Moreland argues, there's something literally the same that we have, in common or before our minds, even, in our communication. So to have the same meaning, in mind, what does that involve? And I think it involves universals. And this is one of the ways I argued about, way Bill, for example, presents the Kalam argument. He intends for his audience, to understand it, to be able to have the same meanings, not the same depth of comprehension that he does. I don't know anyone else, who probably would. I
Yeah.
don't.
Right.
He's written the books about it, not me.
Yeah.
Uh, but we can have the people in the audience can have the same meaning, the same basic meaning in mind that he does. Otherwise, why bother to try to teach it? And that, I think,
Yeah.
boils down to that there's something here that makes those meanings possible and that we can have before our minds. And I think it's got to be universals.
Yeah.
And
And
for
and
them,
you mentioned Husserl in the book a little bit,
yeah,
and you used language of attending to, and
yeah,
to me that seems incredibly significant to not just pass over that idea of where it gets a little more into really trying to contemplate
yeah,
uh, what is presented to us. Which, if you look, and you look at where we're at in society, and everything seems to be about words and the use of words, and and I mean, so going from the metaphysical to the moral to the political,
hmm,
right? And that chain that we're always talking about in apologetics and philosophy and theology of metaphysics grounds morality, morality grounds politics is the expression of the regulation of morality in public, right? And um or moral disagreement, right, in public. And but we live in it almost sounds, I would say, like, I don't know, but I remember reading a little bit of Gabriel Marcel, I believe it was, the Christian existentialist, who talked more about attending to being, right? Attending to being.
huh?
Um, and to me, it just, if like, if we took that seriously, that wait, there are things we share in common, and then there are things we can know in virtue of attending carefully together to those things, and get back to something like that. That, I mean, this would have tremendous uh paradigm shifting kind of implications for how we're living and how we're doing things in society and in politics, right? I mean, I'm only scratching the surface here, but it is
But
a
it's an
paradigm
important
shift.
it's
Yeah,
yes. Well, even be able to have good discussions, amongst people of very different political positions
and
or
culture and
very,
everything. Yeah, yeah,
yeah, or even just between people who are on different poles, in our polarized, Congress or Senate,
yeah,
to be able to have um, meaningful discussions, about justice, for example. Or is this really a way to achieve justice? Well, what is justice? And let's talk about that.
yeah. Or
And
better conversations on the nature of humanity or human nature and essence to humanity, and
yeah,
getting something like that back into our discussions on pro-life issues, and the problem of the moral issue of abortion,
and
for example.
and how different discussions are going on. I think of transgender rights,
Right.
for example, and I think behind that, on the different sides, are still concerned of protecting these people's rights and their dignity. Okay, let's talk about dignity.
Yeah. What is that?
What
Right.
is dignity? Is it just a way of talking from our different ways of
Yeah.
looking at things? And if we don't talk the same language, then maybe we are just left with, and you mentioned McIntyre, maybe we're just left with shouting matches.
Yeah. Well, and if
And
everybody
this,
becomes a linguistic community unto his or her or their self, then
yeah,
we really have a problem. It reminds me of then the gray town in C.S. Lewis's The Great Divorce, where everybody just keeps moving further and further away in this endless cityscape, because they're a world unto them. They're a reality unto themselves, And I think I emailed you that short story by Jorge Borges, which I went
mm,
back and read that. I'm like, and it was a brilliant little sort of fictional sort of exposition of the problem of if everything's just a language or just words. So I would reference people to go read that, which has a strange title, Funes the Memorious, but you know, where he kind of lays out in this little sort of short story the danger of a radical kind of nominalism, right? Where we have nothing, there's really is nothing that we share in common at all, not about ourselves or about anything we experience.
yeah,
No.
very dangerous.
Well,
Radical
Scott,
subjectivism.
yeah, we'll leave it at that. I really touched on some great stuff, and we will link to the book and I'll get the links to the articles in Phil Christie and so on and so forth, so
Okay,
that people
thank
can
you.
pursue this topic a little bit more on their own as well.
Okay,
And I hope that they would. So thanks again for your time, and yeah, God bless, and I look forward to seeing you in person the next time. In person
there,
the next time.
there we go.
Yeah, so not just via Zoom and virtual reality.
Yeah.
But okay.
Well, thanks. Good to be with you and the rest of your audience here.
All
Thank you
right.
very much. My
Thanks, Scott.
privilege.
All right.
All right. Take care.